Hi, Peter Boolkah here, and welcome to today's edition of the Transition Guy. Now, joining me today in the studio is James Diorio, author of Crypto Decrypted and CEO of Tradecraft Capital. Welcome, James.
Thanks, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, great to have you. And this is a subject that I feel is very, very topical right now, yet very misconstrued, misunderstood, massively probably missed by most people.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much hype out there around the world of blockchain and crypto. I say you can't turn on a financial news station without hearing Bitcoin mentioned 37 times a minute, and everyone's losing their mind. There's fear of missing out. There's FUD. There's I'm in, I'm out, and all of that is really wrong thinking. A lot of what we set out to do with the book Crypto Decrypted, which I wrote with my business partner Jake Ryan, was kind of cut through the noise and get people some clarity over why this is important, why blockchain is relevant, why it's going to be impactful for virtually every man, woman, and child on the planet, and why this genie's out of the bottle. This is no longer a question of, is this going to be a thing that happens? It's happening. Adoption is happening left and right.
Well,
And
here's the thing. You and I are having this conversation today, but the feedback loop I get often from people, well, that's a Gen Z thing. That's either a Gen Z thing or a Generation Alpha thing.
right,
I'm too old for this. And these are damn millennials talking.
right.
Well, I'm definitely no millennial. That's for sure. Yeah, I'm seeing this play out day in, day out in my life.
It's so let's look at technology. Chat GPT showed up and it scared everyone. Everyone all of a sudden was like, wow, there was an awakening moment. It's not like someone just, had an insight one night, coded all night, and then the next day we had Chat GPT, right? This technology has been in development, and AI is not something that's a new concept. But all of a sudden, it's like we woke up and it's here and everyone's aware of it. Well, I argue the same thing is going to happen with blockchain technology. There will be a moment not too far in the future. Gartner says we're 1 to 3 years away from from adoption. And that's going to be early stages, but there'll be a moment when we wake up and it'll be like, wow, oh my gosh, it's touched everything. Well, that's happening right now. So a lot of what is really important to us is we want people to understand that this is going on and move the conversation away from, hey, what's kind of the hot token that I can make money on? Or is Bitcoin a real thing? And more into an understanding of the technology, because people didn't understand the internet when the internet, it was, no one understood, why is Jeff Bezos selling books online? What does that mean? Right? I can just walk down to my local bookstore and buy a book. Well, um, you know, uh, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, you probably haven't gone into a bookstore, right?
Yeah,
But
what is
that's
a
what we did
bookstore?
back in
Yeah.
the right, exactly. So but that's what we did back then. We walked into a bookstore and we bought a book, and if they didn't have it in the bookstore, we couldn't get the book. We had to order it and then go back later, right? So the
It's a
internet's
bit like
changed everything.
what Steve Jobs did with iTunes, really.
Sure,
Yeah, what is a
sure.
record? What is a CD?
Yep. Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. So there's an opportunity here. There's a Buckminster Fuller quote, and it says, we're called to be architects of our future. But how can you architect your future? And this is for entrepreneurs. So I understand your audience is entrepreneurs and folks really out there looking to make a difference and innovate. How can you architect your future if you don't understand what's happening that's shaping that future? So from our standpoint, understanding is everything. And that was the whole point of Crypto Decrypted is not so much the what, but the why. And it's relevant. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I've built 5 businesses. I've bought 2, sold 2, and I missed this on first blush.
Yeah,
You
I'm the
know,
same. I missed it, and I like to think of myself as being fairly switched on.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's easy to do. Well, particularly when you're an entrepreneur, you're so focused on what's right in front of you. I know for myself, I was so I'm an engineer by nature. I have a degree in computer science, College of Engineering, but moved into becoming an operator, and I was doing a turnaround. So it was a software as a service turnaround, and I remember it was 2012. One of my developers came to me and said, "Hey, I'm going to mine Bitcoin." And I was like, okay, good luck with that. Just make sure you stay on top of your duties because you got a huge coding stack in front of you, right? And then in 2016, my business partner, Jake Ryan, he said to me, Jim, you know, you should go buy some Bitcoin. And I looked at it and I said, this is nuts. You're nuts. Good luck with your crazy crypto thing. Right. I couldn't even hear it and I didn't understand it at all. And in 2017, had an exit. And I said, okay, maybe I'm nuts. Maybe I need to pay a little more attention here and not just let it pass me by. So I spent a year and I went everywhere I could go. I went to Dubai. I went to Europe. I went to Toronto, which is a hub. Went all over the US. And I studied, I learned, I met people. I wanted a worldwide perspective. And I became convinced that, wow, this is a technology that's going to be impactful. And I was looking at it, frankly, from how can I serve my clients? That was what my context was at the time. I didn't ever expect I'd be, running a digital asset manager. That's not what it set out to do. But when I became convinced, 2 things really hit me. Everyone needs to be aware of what this is because it's not going away and it's going to change our lives. And the second thing that hit me is this is really hard to understand. It's really hard to get your hands around what this is and why we should care. So, you know, uh, I want to make sure if we do anything on this, that your listeners are left here with a bit more of a why,
So,
that they can take into their lives.
so that's a good place to start then, because I think that very often people confuse blockchain and crypto and don't understand the purpose of each.
Yep.
Many think it's just a very quick way of making money, when you and I both know that that was never its purpose, and that is not even what it's set up to do long term. So perhaps for the audience, can we have a distinction of what the two do, why they exist, and the importance they're going to play over the next couple of years as this technology starts to really solidify?
Right. No, absolutely. People talk about cryptocurrencies. I kind of like to do away with that word because I think it's a disservice. There are 10,000 plus or minus blockchains out there, more being built, some failing consistently, but let's call the number 10,000. And those are blockchains. Blockchain technology is what's really interesting here. A crypto asset has a relationship. Let me do this. Let's start with what is a blockchain. A blockchain is just a database. That's all it is. It's a very special kind of a database. It's a database where there is no one computer in charge of anything. So it's a network of computers that are all peers. And data, once written, can never be changed. Every computer can see everything that's happening, all the data. Everyone has a copy, and there are no secrets. It's all transparent, and everything is verified, encrypted. It's secure. So it's just a really special kind of a database. And the first thing is that this is a technology, and to be aware of that. It's not money, it's a technology. So that's what blockchain is, a very special type of a database. Well, then what's a token? I prefer the term crypto asset. Well, you can think of it as a liquid, fractional, tradable portion of a blockchain, but that doesn't mean it's money. So it could be money like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a money use case of blockchain, but it could represent a digital good. It could represent a health record. It could represent it could represent a piece of art like an NFT, but I think that kind of debases the value of what an NFT can be. It could represent governance or voting rights. If I hold 5% of a governance token for a certain blockchain, I have 5% of the voting rights on it. And I'm simplifying this, but I want people to get the concepts, right? Or it could give me the ability to do transactions. One of the things that's misunderstood, let's look at Bitcoin as money. Ethereum isn't money. What's Ether? Well, Ether allows you to do business, to do transactions on the Ethereum blockchain. Ethereum is a blockchain that allows you to build additional blockchains and smart contracts and different things. Think of it as a development toolkit. Well, before blockchain, if you wanted to use a technology, you'd get a user license and you'd pay a company something. Well, this is just a technology. So if I want to do a transaction, I need to use a little bit of Ether to get that transaction done. So that it provides utility for that blockchain. So without going into too much detail there, those are the foundations. A blockchain is a database, and a crypto asset is just a tradable portion of that database that could do many different things. With that being said, here's the why. And this is what I think the most important thing is. And this is Jake and I really spent some time on this in the book. Why we care about any of this at all is because blockchain solved one of the top 10 computer science problems of all time. And that's just missed. And that's called the Byzantine generals problem. Right. And already people tune out, like, Byzantine generals problem, what's that? It's super simple, right? It says, if I've got a group of peers, if I've got 10 generals and no one's in charge, so they're all equals, and I've got to attack a city. If we do it at the same time, we win. And if we don't, we lose. That's what the problem is. So said differently is, how do I get a group of peers to do something if there's no commander, if there's no one person or company or entity in charge of it? That's incredible if you think about it. Solving that problem does one major thing. It allows us to operate in the digital world the same way that we can operate in the physical world today. And that's never been possible. Now, let me make that really real. If we were sitting next to each other, I could hand you a $20 bill. Right. I had it. I handed it to you. You had it. You have it. And it's yours. You put it in your pocket and you're done. I didn't have to ask my bank. I didn't have to ask a company. I didn't have to ask the studio. I didn't have to ask my mom. I didn't have to ask anybody. I could just give you a $20 bill. That's never been possible in the digital world. In the digital world, a bank tells you how much money you have or don't have, right? And I don't know if we have time to go into that. That's a whole other set of conversation. But the bank will tell you, that's deep. Let's not go there. But or a credit card will tell you how much credit you have or don't have, right? Or a video game will tell you, can you access that pickaxe? There's always been a counterparty, a third party that you have to go through. So blockchain means that we don't have to do that anymore. We can operate as peers in the digital world. And that's amazing. It's one of the reasons Dubai is sinking billions of dollars into being the metaverse capital of the world. Because they think instead of maybe doing this as a meeting here, as a podcast, that we would rather feel like we're sitting in the exact same room with each other, right? Having this conversation just like we were in the exact same room with each other, right? They're looking at metaverse for commerce, not for gaming.
Which will be here before you know it.
It's going to be like the big killer app. It's going to be here, in years, not decades. It's already starting. So this is what we want people to understand. This is the why. The why is it transforms the way we can operate in the digital world. We don't really know what to do with that yet. We're still trying to figure it out. And there's some great use cases for blockchain technology that every entrepreneur should know about. But importantly, shifting the conversation away from what's hot and what can I make money on and into how is this going to change the way the world works is pivotal for everyone because it's going to touch every industry, just like AI is touching every industry, right? It's going to touch everything. So I hope that's valuable. I hope that that made sense. But really, that's the key thing that we want to underscore.
And I suppose it's a technology that we don't fully know what to do with yet. It's probably going to be mainstream in 3 years' time. So the window of transition is not going to be huge. Like anything, those people that adopted the internet early had a really strong business model on the internet as it was emerging, made good money. The same is going to be for blockchain. The question is, how do people learn about this stuff now? Entrepreneurs are looking, thinking hocus pocus blockchain.
Yeah.
People are still saying hocus pocus crypto. Yeah, they're dismissing it as perhaps the internet was dismissed 30 odd years ago when it was conceived. Oh, that won't work. People are saying this won't work. And quite evidently it will work. But how do we skill up people quickly on this so that when this technological revolution when it does come, that people do not get left behind like they have done many times in the past? Because I think that when this wave comes, it will be fatal for businesses that don't pivot fast.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And well, this is part of it now, this podcast, right? And this is a whole point that we wrote the book. So, a great place to start would be Crypto Decrypted, because we unpack a lot of these things, the why as well as the myths, right? In a digestible format. Let's cut through the myths. Let's get to why this matters. And let's have a sane approach to participation in these markets and a glimpse of where the future is going to go. I know we don't have time to get into all of that, but the first thing I think that people have to do is understand that this is happening. When you look back, you mentioned the internet, right? One of my favorite quotes is Paul Krugman, who's a Nobel Prize winning economist, is quoted in 1998 as saying, by 2005 or so, it'll become clear that the internet's impact on the economy has been no greater than the fax machines. Okay, that was in 98, right? So there are naysayers out there everywhere. And people have opinions, but facts don't care about your opinions, right? They just don't. And the fact is that we have a new technology that provides new ways for the world to work. One of the things that's often misunderstood, by the way, is we have a thesis that we're in a new age. We're out of the information age, and we're in this thing called the age of autonomy. Well, what is that? Again, lots of buzzwords. The age of autonomy, it's based on 100 years of economic theory, and it says that all long wave cycles, a 40 to 70-year cycle, is going to be as a result of a revolutionary technology. So what does that mean? Oil, steel, the internet. These are technologies that changed the world, right? And then we had these boom periods after. And as you mentioned, if you got in early, right? And I'm not just talking about what's the right thing to invest in. It's understanding how to participate in the technological revolution. You did incredibly well. You had to cut through the nonsense. You had to cut through the naysayers and get to the core of it and have some vision, just like Jeff Bezos had vision. So we like blockchain because it's the tip of the spear, but it's not just blockchain. We think people need to understand it's blockchain as it relates to artificial intelligence and robotics and the Internet of Things, that these four technologies together are really going to be the driving factor in change. And what I would say about that is, I can break it down into 4 sentences. IoT is sensor data, and IBM says that knowledge, think of that as data, is doubling every 12 hours, right? There's just a massive amount of data. Well, AI can turn that data into knowledge. What do I mean by that? Something that's digestible, something that puts the data together and draws some conclusions.
ChatGPT being a great example of that. And that's not even connected to the internet yet.
It's at the very beginning of it, right? It's not even particularly smart, but we're learning how to put this together and to come to conclusions. And that's what AI does. And AI is going to advance very quickly now. If I've got robotics, I can make a self-driving car. And that's great, but that's not even a breakthrough anymore. We had that back in 2018. I think a truck went from California to Ohio. It was a self-driving truck. But that's where those three technologies can get us. Now, when you add blockchain, it's a technology. It's a technology that allows peer-to-peer transactions without human intervention. So capital transactions, well, we're talking to entrepreneurs. You need your business to operate at the same speed as these other technologies. So now you can have capital transactions that occur, right, in concert with all of these other things that are with all these other technologies and what they're accomplishing. So a real simple example is I'm a chocolate guy, and I use this example a lot. I love chocolate. I love, where's it from? What's the cacao content, right? What's the country of origin? All of it. So if I build a chocolate business and I'm an entrepreneur, I can look at supply and demand. I can look at my OPEX, and I can look at my CapEx, and I can look at my competitors, and I can, make a business plan. I go out there and build a chocolate company, and that's cool. But what if in the future, right, I have an AI running, an artificial intelligence running, and let's say I draw my underlying commodity, my cacao bean, right, and I get that from Africa, from Ghana, right? What happens if I have an AI saying, hey, there's going to be a geopolitical problem, and then before anyone knows what's happening, it can execute a smart contract, right, and actually contract and pull that commodity or divert to a secondary supplier, maybe in South America, and do it before, my competitors even know what's happening.
Yeah.
At that point, I have an advantage that can't be matched. And what we say is autonomy is the ultimate competitive advantage. And businesses that do not have autonomous operations will not be able to operate with businesses that do. And this is why it's relevant for every entrepreneur. You don't want to wedge a technology in to try to find, you don't want to be a solution in search of a problem. But as things evolve, businesses are going to need to adopt, because AI is changing everything. The amount of data out there is ridiculous. Robotics turn it into physicality, as I mentioned. Now we can have capital transactions that operate at the same speed in an elegant way. So, and that's just one aspect of it, but it's very powerful. So this is why we urge entrepreneurs to think about it in this way. And not just entrepreneurs, everybody, but particularly entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and a lot of the solutions you've just covered in the space of a couple of minutes would actually solve a lot of the staffing issues many businesses face today.
Sure.
A lot of people are saying, oh, there's going to be a huge loss of jobs. It's going to impact people's livelihoods. In the UK alone, we have currently 1.2 million open vacancies that cannot be filled. You've seen the US Fed raise interest rates. Their greatest efforts to crash the economy isn't working. Because no matter how many businesses are being forced to sort of go out of business because they can no longer afford to trade, unemployment isn't rising because the sheer number of vacancies open is crazy. People are still paying stupid money. It is literally unrealistic money for jobs that really don't have that value.
Yep.
And it's probably a technology that can help combat actually challenges like inflation down the line, which are the angles that people are not looking at.
Well, and again, we tend to go to fear where there's change. We tend to get afraid, right? So, oh my gosh, AI is going to have all this job displacement. Well, it will, but I prefer transference. It means there's going to be a different set of skill sets, right? We moved from, the agrarian age to the industrial age. We made that transition, right? The internet changed everything.
Yeah.
Right? Completely changed the way the world works, right? So we're at the cusp here. So people have a couple of choices. They can put their head in the sand and say, oh my gosh, I'm afraid of this. Let's try to stop it from happening. But you can't stop a train. The train is on the tracks and it's going, right? This technology is evolving. So we prefer to see people, how do I embrace it and understand it instead of trying to stop it? which is one of the challenges, that the governments around the world have had. We've got people are embracing this technology now. In the US, from a regulatory standpoint, there's a lot of infighting still and trying to understand how to control it. While elsewhere in the world, in the EU, you've got the MiCA bill, which is really setting the grounds for proper regulation of stablecoins, which is a type of crypto asset that's related to a currency, a dollar or a euro. They're looking at how do we embrace it, right? There are other regions, Dubai, Singapore, even Hong Kong is regulatory friendly. So from a back down to the business owner here, the technology's here. How do I embrace that and integrate it? Now, here's what's hard as an entrepreneur. You're busy. You're focused on what's right in front of you. How do you look ahead? But if you don't pop your head up and take a look at this, that's when you get crushed by the train.
And the
Right.
train's coming. The train is coming.
The train is coming. Absolutely. Right. So best to be aware, right? And be aware of that train and be aware of what's happening there. And then you can participate. There's an old saying, it's easier to ride the horse from the direction that it's going. Right. So if we know that this is happening, let's look at how we can embrace it and participate in it. And it's going to be different and it's going to evolve. And we don't have all the answers yet. Look at cell phones. I love this example. Right. One of the fulfillments of the internet is the cell phone. We don't have a device that basically is tethered to us and we leave it in the other room or on a table for 5 minutes. We have anxiety. Oh my God, where's my cell phone? It's become such a part of us. Right? It was hard to imagine that back in the 90s.
Yeah, true.
Today, kids grow up with cell phones. They've never not known a cell phone. Right? I grew up without the internet. The internet wasn't a thing when I was a kid.
Likewise.
Right? So these things that people take as rote, there's periods where they weren't there. And you could argue that one of the fulfillments of the internet was the cell phone. But it was hard. Not many people had vision of it back then. Some did. Hey, we're going to make a device that has communication and streaming video and music and data, and some people had that, but it was very, very few. So I challenge particularly the entrepreneurs to look ahead. Right? Because if you can see it and you can start to understand it, then you'll see, and here's the thing, look, you'll see native ways that it can participate. You're not going to have to work really hard. A lot of times the answers are right in front of us. We're just too busy to see them. Jake told me to look at Bitcoin at $674 a coin in 2016. I wasn't smart enough to see it then. Right? I was just too busy.
I remember looking at it at $1 a coin.
Oh wow, yeah.
And I ignored it then, thinking, no, wow, that was a foolish mistake.
Yeah. But we're still early in this. But this is what's important. We're still early in this whole thing, right? This is a technological play.
Well, a lot of people are misconstruing that, thinking it's headed stay when it's only beginning, because they're doing the short-term play. Not that they don't realize there's a long game. I mean, it's quite frightening, actually, that probably 2003, 2004, that's what officially sort of ended the industrial age era, and we entered the knowledge worker age. Now, typically, that kind of age would normally last, as you said, probably 80 to 100 years. We're already saying 20 years in, not even 20 years in, that we're out of that. The knowledge worker age is sort of coming to an end. We're now moving into the next age. That's how quickly potentially things are moving.
Yeah, and these things start early. We're in the early days. Blockchain is compared to the internet a lot, but when you look at the origins, ARPANET, that was decades before. Right. And then it really didn't start getting traction until the 90s. Right. And then all of a sudden it was like, wow. Right. And then we had this whole kind of renaissance, but there was a baking period. We're at the beginning of that baking period. It's not like we've missed anything. We're still early on in this conversation. and and part of this is, and entrepreneurs will understand this, right? There's trial and error. It's good for this, it's not good for this, right? This is a great idea, this isn't a great idea. And we're going to need to experiment, and we're going to need to look at the use cases that are really, really good. And we're going to need to understand how these technologies will all work together. And looking ahead at that, it's going to be very, very impactful. And certainly, yes, you can make a lot of money in this space. But looking at the right thing to buy at the right time is often, from our perspective, the wrong answer. Right? Doesn't mean you can't, but in the universe of, we talk about this in the book, of 10,000 roughly blockchains. In the book, we back in with math and say, maybe 12.5% are viable. That's because that's what we could back into with math. From a gut standpoint, maybe 400 or 500 today are really viable, are really technologies that are solving problems that are going to last, right? So if you can kind of pick through, and it's hard to do, right? But if you can pick through and cull those through and understand what those are, then you can understand what impact is going to be. I mean, the stats. How many businesses fail?
Well, yeah. Probably, what did they say? That 1% make it to 5 years or something like that.
It's a staggering stat, and right off the bat, only 1 out of 4 venture-backed companies makes it, and then over time. So it's hard to build a business. We're now integrating a technology. The rules of business still apply. Not every business is a good idea, right? Even businesses that are a great idea, if they're not executed well, don't succeed.
That's so true.
Right? So you've got all these factors on top of it, plus a new technology integrating with other new technologies that we still haven't quite grokked yet. So from our standpoint, it's very exciting.
So if we make this simple for people, well, you're not going to exactly make it simple, but
I'll try.
We've covered a lot here. So what would be a few sort of starting points that entrepreneurs, business owners, and those that are listening in to this episode could take? What are the next logical steps, speaking to an engineer?
Well, the first thing I would do is get educated, right? Okay. Listen to podcasts, do your homework, and understand it from a bigger picture perspective. Right? That's the very first thing. Lay the foundation for yourself to be prepared to make good decisions in the future. And that comes from understanding.
Okay. And your book would obviously be one of those starting points.
Sure. That was the whole point of writing it. Okay, yeah, it was to provide a different perspective in this world. And look, we spend the beginning of it, we talk about the foundation, we do a primer because you have to understand the basics, right? But then getting clarity around the myths, understanding the why, and then understanding where this is going. We wanted to provide that perspective as opposed to just, how do I get rich with crypto, right? That's, again, the wrong question. This is a get rich slow program, is one of the ways to participate in it, which is, if you're involved with any technology, right? And sure, it could be, hey, I bought some Bitcoin at the right time, right? Yep. But it could also be, hey, I figured out how to integrate this into my business, right? We're seeing supply chain, right, is a great use case, right? Blockchain applied to supply chain management is transforming the way supply chain management works, right? And this is a whole conversation for probably a whole other podcast to talk about that. But, there are viable use cases that are out there. So once you understand the foundation, then for the entrepreneur, yes, understand how to apply it to the business.
So get educated. So get educated first. What else would you suggest?
Well, then look at, is what I'm, for an entrepreneur. So I'll put this into 2 areas. For the entrepreneurial, is what I'm doing relevant, or am I going to be stuck in the cold in the next 5 years?
Or right? Crushed by that train.
Exactly. Right. You don't want to be blindsided. So understanding it says, hey, is what I'm building going to be relevant? And if it's going to be relevant, great. Figure out how to integrate. If it's not going to be relevant, you might want to consider, maybe there's another direction to go in.
Okay.
Right. So that's really important you know, uh, from an investment standpoint. Look, I don't want to say people can't make money on these things, but then you want to bring, so there's that integrate to your business cycle. If people are looking at how do I capitalize on this, and I have to say, this is not investment advice. You have to do your own homework. Um, you know, I so study and learn. But you want to evaluate these things. And if you want to say, hey, I think a technology is going to be relevant, right? Okay, great. Maybe you do participate in that technology as an investor. And that whole game has changed, by the way, right? It used to be if you wanted to invest in technology, you had to buy a portion of a company that was implementing that technology. And that game has changed now, right? Because now the core technologies exist, blockchain technologies exist. And if I hold part of the token, it's not a security, right? Well, as long as it's not a security. But if I'm looking at a token, a fractionalized portion of a blockchain, and that blockchain is relevant, it has a team that can deliver on it, it has a moat, right? It's got a purpose, a USP. It's got reasonable market cap and adoption. It's got proper tokenomics where, as more people use it, there's less and less supply. That's supply and demand economics, right? You can participate in these technologies directly, and that's very exciting. And it's not as sexy as finding something that's a penny and hoping it becomes $1 or $2 or $10 or $20. But if you look at the technologies that people are adopting and they check all these boxes, and again, we talk about this in the book, and they check all these boxes, and you say, okay, that's something that has a reasonable chance of standing the test of time, right? And this, businesses that provide value grow in value. Technologies that provide value, we would expect the same thing, right? They have to have all the hydraulics set up to succeed, right? But it's looking at that longer cycle.
Okay. Would there be anything else you would sort of advise today's listeners?
There's a lot. I would say, how much time do we have? One of the things that I would say is just be careful out there. Focus on providing value with your businesses. Look at technology that provide value. If you see an opportunity that looks too good to be true, it probably is. Right. So be mindful, be careful, take your time, get educated. Don't rush into things. Right.
Well, we've seen
There's
that with
a
a
lot
lot
of
of
fraud.
people. We've seen that with a lot of people just losing their life savings, where
Sure.
misguided investments. I mean, Terra Lumen was a good one, where that went
Yep.
absolutely popped overnight, and people just pegged everything on their entire fortune on it, hoping that they'd have that magical win. They ended up
Yep.
being the loss of a nightmare.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, um, don't take your life savings and put it into something and be wise. Follow things that make sense, right? So and sometimes you're going to make a good move, and sometimes you're going to make a bad move, right? But diversify what you're doing. And just be, again, I keep coming back to common sense, right? If you see something you don't understand, stop and understand it first, right? If someone comes to you and say, hey, I've got a bridge I want to sell you, right? You wouldn't say, okay, great, I'm going to buy a portion of that bridge. Well, back in the day, I guess that happened, right? When someone comes up to you with an offer that looks too good to be true, do your homework, understand it. Watch out for FOMO. FOMO is the biggest thing that's out there. Everyone is afraid that they've missed out. And again, the argument is, I say, we're at the beginning here. You're at the beginning of a long wave cycle. You haven't missed anything. So, be aware of that, because that's a huge driver of the human psyche.
So if people want to get in touch with you because they want to go deeper, they want more information, can they connect with you?
Sure, of course. Let's do well. there'll be a link at the bottom of the of this podcast. Yeah.
Yep.
So please reach out. You can follow me on Twitter. And of course, you can reach out to me, through the book. So my contact information will be below.
Fantastic. Well, listen, James, thank you for being an awesome guest. If there's anything that's resonated with you today and you want a bit more information, head over to Boolkah.com and get in touch. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like it because we love likes. Share it with others so they do not miss out. And please subscribe so you don't miss out. And once again, James, thank you so much. You've been an awesome guest.
Peter, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And remember, failing to learn is learning to fail.